This episode is sponsored by Card Kingdom. Go to cardkingdom.com/studies to pick up all your favorite old school Magic cards. From Goblin Grenades and Hymn to Turox to Alpha Bolts and Birds, CK has it all and will ship your entire order in one package. Thank you, Card Kingdom, for the support. I'm a member of Team BASILISK, an esports organization on a mission to catalyze the next generation of scientists through the study and play of difficult games. Our growing team supports pro play in StarCraft 2, chess, and the FGC, with some all-time talent in each community. Thank you, Basilisk, for the support. All I've ever heard about Fallen Empires is just how much of a failure it was. I'm sure these beats will sound familiar. Fallen Empires was a small set of 102 cards that actually amounted to 187 cards because all of the commons appeared in 3 or 4 versions with different illustrations and flavor text per variant. It was dramatically overprinted with respect to the sets that came before it by a measure of hundreds of millions. This saturation had cascading effects on the primary and secondary markets, which angered the established collectors and discouraged potential aspirants from investing in Magic. Cartamundi, the printing company in Belgium that made Magic cards, was ordered to cease production and subsequently destroy the excess supply occupying valuable storage space in the company's warehouses. 2 additional print runs were scheduled but later axed, which took equity away from printing revised, a ripple effect that we still feel now. The massive quantity of cards that successfully shipped from the facilities were further burdened by low-quality designs. Fallen Empires was severely underpowered against the heavy-hitting antecedents of Alpha, Arabian Nights, and Legends, and the cards were complex too. 14 different types of counters were required to play, including the asymmetrical +1/+2 counters and the thematically resonant tide counters, but excluding the most straightforward of +1/+1 counters that have become the default in design today. Over half the set was comprised of creatures, but none of them had the keyword flying, a baffling but intentional decision by R&D, who felt the ability was overused. Even the booster packs were meager offerings of only 8 cards, 6 of which were common, and they were packaged in a semi-transparent plastic that could be exploited by vendors and players to unsuspecting buyers or traders. By December of 1995, a year following the release of Fallen Empires, not even Wizards of the Coast could stand by the mistakes they made with this set. Lending article space in the Duelist to game store owner Glenn Goddard from Albuquerque, New Mexico, the disgruntled retailer let it rip. The overproduction of Fallen Empires was, from my vantage point, the single most important event in the trading card game field in 1995. Players, retailers, distributors, and Wizards all shared in the market adjustment that Fallen Empires caused. Among his list of wishes for 1996 were the end of distribution to mass market retailers of any game but the current edition, and a Wizards of the Coast which has stopped taking its longtime customers for granted. On top of everything, more and more competition was arriving on the scene. All sorts of new trading card games were cropping up left and right in the wake of Magic's monumental success. The halcyon years of 93 and 94 were over, and reality was setting in for the darling Seattle startup that had changed the gaming industry forever. In some dark, poetic sense, like the often repeated Latin proverb nomen est omen, Fallen Empires was nearly the self-fulfilling prophecy to send a fledgling company into freefall toward bankruptcy. And yet, despite its many, many shortcomings, Fallen Empires turned 31 on November 15th this year, and we're all still here, and many of us have since fallen in love with Magic's first failure. Nestled in the corner of Dominaria's sprawling world map, we find the isolated continent of Sarpadia, a remote landmass south of the plane's most familiar locales, where the warring brothers Urza and Mishra brought cataclysm to the planet and all its peoples. Before the fallout of the Silex blast could encase the world in ice, Sarpadia was governed by 5 kingdoms interspersed across the land. They were the diplomatic humans of Acacia, the merfolk castes of Vidalia, the dogmatic Order of the Ebon Hand, the stalwart dwarves of the Crimson Peaks, and the resourceful elves of Havenwood. As the air got colder, food became scarce, and old tensions hastened internal divisions. It took only a matter of months before the governing bodies were splintered beyond suture. The collapse was quick and tragic. A series of letters published in the Duelist issue number 3 detailed the downfall. The dwarves were assaulted by bands of raiding orcs and goblins. The merfolk were invaded by a strange and primitive species who encroached upon their cooler waters. The elves were overwhelmed by the thalids, a fungal creature of their own making that served as a renewable source of food in a changing climate. Similar was true for the Ebon Hand, who gained momentary advantage over the continent before succumbing to the thralls, servants turned revengers of their masters. Struggling to provide resources to its allies and defenses against its enemies were the Icatians, who also faced a religious schism from within their order. As hope dwindled, their efforts turned inward. Sarpadia shows no signs of returning to the warm and prosperous land it was during the time of our forebears. With no relief in sight, His Majesty must look to the needs of his own people first. Long before serialized novels and web fictions, Magic relied on marketing materials like the aforementioned articles in The Duelist and the tiny spaces along booster wrappers to communicate its narrative. Flavor text was also key in telling a fragmented story. Taking a page from high fantasy role-playing games, the history of the Sarpadian Empire spans 6 volumes of in-world tomes. This detail may have been a nod to Edward Gibbon's giant work of scholarship, which also appeared in as many volumes in its first edition. You might recognize the book's iconic spines with that crumbling ionic column. It's possible that the writers at Wizards of the Coast used Rome as a case study for fallen empires. There are certainly parallels to be made. The set's premise, its central meditation, is concerned with the conditions that lead to a functioning civilization's collapse. Although the game is rooted in a setting where magic is omnipresent, the problems these factions faced were banal and practical. The Sarpadian empires fell because the environment changed, and citizens ran out of provisions, and zealots and charlatans quickly filled a political power struggle that was stretched thin by the material difficulties of sudden crisis. The lack of decorum in this story is partly what renders it so dire, and thus so compelling. In a script extracted by April King from the source code of the 1997 video game Battle Mage by Acclaim, the doomed fate of the continent's inhabitants is laid bare. Despite the numerous conflicts, it is conceivable that the Sarpadians could have banded together. Few had the foresight to realize that extinction was knocking at the door. The text concludes by drawing a somber parallel between this story and the fate of the plane at large. Across Dominaria, the tragedy of Sarpadia was repeated in 1,000 forms and in 1,000 languages. In the end, the lesson was clear to all. Corruption breeds destruction, and those without mercy are those without hope. Adding to the weight is the register of retrospect. Unlike contemporary Magic stories, which are often episodic and mirror set releases in real time, Fallen Empires concedes the ending in its title. We already know what happens, and so we feel helpless to the outcome, which must be deciphered through excerpts of non-fictional text within the fiction. The language is written with a distant past and layered with conditional perfects, the regretful mood of could have, would have, should have. Returning to the letters from the Duelist, I find the fate of the dwarves the most tragic, who faced betrayal from their saviors in their waning moments. Writing from within an abandoned mine, the situation is desperate. We are out of food. The Order of the Ebon Hand had promised us reinforcements, but my meager intelligence reports indicate that the mercenary captain has instead joined the orcs and goblins. All I can ask now is to remember us as we prepare to make our final stand, and perhaps to include our valiant fight in some small corner of the history of your people. This hope would hardly come to pass. As we learn in Volume 1 of the historic text, their civilization was the first to fall, and its name was sadly lost. Why did the dwarves succumb so quickly? What was their fatal misstep? The Battle Mage text provides diagnosis. Of all the empires of Sarpadia, the dwarves were perhaps the most reasonable and the most peaceful. Naturally, they were the first to die. Echoes of Tolkien are etched into the headstone of their final resting place, a mass grave found in the Crimson Peaks. Among the many questions that history asks of those who write it is this: what is remembered, and how, and by whom? Fallen Empires roots its perspective in those who were defeated. As such, some knowledge was inevitably lost with the people who are no longer there, shrouding in mystery the events that took place. Scholars still debate whether the Thalids were truly sentient. What a haunting thought. Could it be that the elves were dealing with a livestock more alive than they initially believed? How did they justify their ongoing farming, knowing the species was likely self-aware? Even then, could they have survived without them amid the dropping temperatures? At times, survival must outweigh all other considerations. In that case, were the elves victims, or was their demise a karmic justice? Could it not be argued that the Thalids too were just trying to survive? And the orcs, and the goblins, and the thralls? While the Thalids were framed as a rapidly reproducing pest, the histories seem to be much more empathetic toward the plight of the thralls. Created by the wizard Endric Sar, the thralls were used as sacrificial fodder in rituals to Turok, the Order of the Ebon Hands founder turned deity in worship. As his experiments scaled in scope, new species emerged. The armor thralls were an abomination of flesh and steel bred to equip soldiers with suits of platework. Nekrites and mind stabs were kamikaze assassins who delighted in targeted self-destruction, and there was even a collective of highly intelligent wizards trained to aid in ceremony. Sar's masterwork, the Daralor, was a grotesque hybrid of centaur and amphibian. Its brute-like power demanded an unsustainable supply of energy, a cost paid at the creator's expense. Endric Sar was ordered to be executed, and soon after, the Thralls began their rebellion. Although the 5 factions faced their own internal demise, the Thralls eventually claimed total dominion of Sarpadia. In an interview with Matt Cavada from 2007, magic artist and continuity manager Pete Venter stated that the only reason that the Thralls didn't go on to rule the world is that they lacked imagination and never realized that there was anything else beyond the horizon line of water. We used to say that if one day a ship came to Sarpadia, it might be the beginning of the end for Dominaria. Venters concluded the passage with an ominous suggestion. You'll note that we never did learn what happened when the Phyrexians tried to invade Sarpadia. Impervious to the Thralls' advance were the sea-bound Vidalians. Theirs was a deeply hierarchical society that worshipped Sphaliun, the merfolk goddess of the Pearl Moon. Like the dwarves, they also faced starvation, and their militaries were overwhelmed by a rabble of raiding pillagers. These crustacean folk creatures were called the Homerids. Previously contained to the chilly waters of Dominaria's Antarctic, the Homerids migrated north into Sarpadian territory at the outset of the Ice Age. Their ruthless aggression stemmed from pure territorial instincts, against which a spiritual and magic-wielding class of merfolk stood no chance. After Vidalia was conquered, the Homerids moved further north into Dominaria. Returning again to Pete Venters, it was a north-south deep-sea trench that ran almost all the way from Argoth to Sarpadia, which provided route for the Homerids to continue their expansion. Once established in the visceral sea of the Teresian Isles, they were recognized by another name, Viscerids. Despite their extremely antagonistic nature, the Homerids have become a beloved creature type in the history of magic. Fallen Empires is a dark story, yet the Homerids contrast the gloomy tone with a whimsy that only the early 90s could justify. In a high fantasy setting filled to the brim with the tried and true tropes of the genre, they are aliens, like something you'd see in a black and white sci-fi flick. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's just a guy in a lobster costume. In the foreground, a cracking brown egg emerges from a pile of sand. The ridges encasing it resemble those familiar mountain ranges from the hand of the same artist. In the background, 2 silhouettes approach, their antennae stretch across an empty horizon. Here spawn the Homerids, ready to enact war on the world of Sarpadia. Here they are again, rising from the waters, men in rubber suits grasping at spears with their clumsy claws, and tangling with eels, and standing on 2 legs. None of them look like any of the others. Quentin Hoover's Homerid has humanoid eyes, while those of Mark Tadine jet out from the sides of their skulls like crabs. This one looks less like a warrior and more like a journeyman, with conch shell turned knapsack in tow. Their nearby mortal enemies, the Vidalians, are just as multiform. Susan Van Camp provides 2 portraits of normal guys dressed as fish people. while Melissa Benson decorates her soldiers with exotic patterns and vibrant colors, mimics of aquatic life found in the tropics. Richard Kane Ferguson's merfolk are dark, Mark Poole's is heroic, Amy Weber's is gentle and feminine, an Aphrodite submerged. And what of the infantry defending the land above? Both Edward P. Beard Jr. and Christopher Rush imagined the Icatians as larger-than-life super soldiers, stocked in heavy armor and eager for battle. Douglas Schuller and Drew Tucker, on the other hand, envisioned a trio of common folk called forth to defend the hearth, with angst and worry in their eyes, and outfitted in simple surcoats. These brave and faithful knew they marched to their defeat, but marched nonetheless. Fallen Empires is many sets in one, depending on the cards you draw. There is whimsy and there is horror, and there are commissions that wizards of today would never ever touch. The decision to print every common with multiple variants went against the grain of uniformity, but widened the lens of artistic interpretation. Sandra Everingham, the set's art director, seemed at once to provide loose guidance and to get out of the way entirely. The result is spontaneous incongruity. 3 Icatian scouts work within the same composition, but the 4th by the jokester Phil Folio shows some provocateur flying about on a giant blue vampire bat with light pink wings. Traces of what magic would become, visually speaking, are present here. Pete Venter's Mercen looks like it could have been made for 7th edition. That name, by the way, is a portmanteau of the enormous fishing net used, in this case, to catch merfolk. At the same time, many of these illustrations belong decidedly to early magic, when the rules were undefined and there were no style guides, and illustrators were more or less dreamy amateurs working fully from their mind's eye. Margaret Organ Keene would not paint for Magic past Tempest, but she made 5 cards for Fallen Empires, all of which display her signature use of pattern and form. Sporeflower is mechanically a fungus, but the illustration shows its neutralizing effect, as a damsel lies dormant within a frame, within a frame, within a frame. Implements of sacrifice and balm of restoration have women backdropped by mosaics, a recurring motif across her body of work, most recognizably present in Lion's Eye Diamond. And Margaret's Mercen transforms that pattern into a net entrapping a wayward Vidalian. This one I can't imagine bearing a 7th edition set symbol. Although some cards in Fallen Empires leave room for viewer interpretation, none is more widely questioned and discussed as Eben Prater. This is a strange painting. Originally assigned to Randy Asplund Faith with the placeholder name The Dark Judge, we find 3 creatures embracing in front of a judicial figure. They are in hell. Donned in a hat and robes lifted from an ecclesiastical heraldry, the judge bears the face of a deer skull. To his left, a scroll with red inscriptions flows over a marble pedestal. The demonic imp, the kneeling blue woman, and the rabbit in the foreground are on trial, and soon will receive their sentencing. According to Randy, the latter is a puka, a Celtic spirit in disguise. Dante's timeless poem informed the setting, as did the Greeks' perception of the underworld, where cities and castles existed and the dead moved as shadows. Years later, Randy revisited this concept in a painting 3 times as large for a private collector, and Thomas Ricci offered a cheeky cameo of the Dark Judge for Mystery Booster 2. Eben Prater is an avatar of the Order of the Ebon Hand. Its counterpart, the Hand of Justice, is the deity of the Feralites, the breakaway religious sect in Icacia. This painting by Melissa Benson depicts a contemplative royal wrapped in purple robes. On his headdress is a set of perfectly balanced scales, and 2 dice showing snake eyes sit at the arm of his wooden throne. His regal attire is offset by light green skin, a braided beard, and an elaborate mustache. This too is a strange painting. It feels dissonant against Fallen Empire's visual tropes. Without any proof, I wonder if it was originally commissioned for Arabian Nights, but failed to find a home on any of the set's cards. Maybe this piece was among Magic's first batch of so-called slush art, a painting filed away and repurposed in a subsequent card file. Scott Kirshner's illustration on Hymn to Turok is another suspicious piece. Could it be that this was originally intended for the Dark Judge? It's plausible that the jester-looking figure on the left is striking a deal with the stoic on the right, or reviewing its verdict. Speculating further, I could easily see this painting on a card like Contract from below, but not on Hymn to Turok. Even the flavor text discredits the illustration. Members of the order often played the hymn on instruments made from their victims' bones. The painting reflects no such image. The same is true for Heather Hudson's Mindstab Thrall, a composition that must have been conceived for Goblin Grenade. Judging against the other two illustrations for the same card, which clearly depicts the thralls wielding sharp objects, Hudson's creature corresponds exactly to the flavor text on Ron Spencer's card. According to accepted theory, the grenade held some kind of flammable mixture and was carried to its target by a hapless goblin. Maybe the render just didn't work on a red card, or maybe this goblin wasn't adequately goblin-esque. Continuing further, 3 of the 4 Brass Claw orcs are shown wearing the eponymous weaponry, but Dan Fraser's piece could arguably be moved to Orcish Spy. Once again, the flavor text is not lending any favors. But this is the charm, isn't it? When you let artists paint what they wish, you accept the variety of outcomes and allow yourself to drift away from the literal one-to-one relationship between card name and illustration. Fallen Empires is made of a horizontal looseness, one that resists the definitive and embraces the open-ended. The initiates of the Ebon Hand are at once a swarm of monastic undead, and specialists of ritualistic sacrifice, and cultists with enormous third eyes stretching across their chests. The Thalids are an equally indeterminate bunch, from tiny men walking among fields of mushrooms, to plant-like sages, to nightmarish three-headed funguses pulled straight from a Cronenberg film. Injured soldiers can be attended to by 4 different combat medics, and frightened elves can take refuge in 4 different fortresses, and excess goblins can be dismembered and used for parts by 3 different chirurgeons. There's another fancy SAT word. Chirurgeon is the archaic form of surgeon, and those of the goblin variety are fairly flippant with their supplies. You may recognize the creatures being sewn together on this abomination in Phil Folio's illustration. Fallen Empires was Magic's 5th expansion, and so there was already fanfare to draw upon when making references. Folio's time producing comics for The Duelist filled his visual encyclopedia of Magic iconography, and likely informed this piece. Hiding Easter eggs in card art would become a tradition in time, a fun minigame between artists and players, a nonverbal nod from one side of the aisle to the other. Folio's work is synonymous with comedic relief, but Fallen Empires is ultimately a tragic story, and most of the set's illustrations remain within that tone. Striking to me is how many of its landscapes show empty places void of citizenry and life. Icacian Town was once a peaceful place, and now is little more than an armed camp. Ruins of Trocaire and Svelunite Temple and Ebon Stronghold, all bustling capitals, have faded into hollow depositories of memory. The trees are rotting from within. The sand is eroding into silos. The obelisks decorating the entrance to the Dwarven Keep are collapsing into ruins. All that remains is a swath of perfect black, a nothing.
Is this your favorite card of all time?
It's up there.
Yeah?
I love this card. Just a lot of nostalgia playing it as a kid. Sometimes like the designs that are really brilliant and really resonant, make the world feel bigger, are simple. Doesn't have to be double-sided tackle maggots. It can look like this sometimes too.
Sometimes a painting amounts to more than words can express, and its imagery escapes the boundaries of its description. Sometimes buying the original piece is the only way to approximate the debt, to show gratitude to art's mysterious power to take us to places that aren't there, and give real feelings to fictitious events. Sometimes a print just won't cut it, and you need to get close to the real thing, and see the brush marks, and feel the latent energy instilled. Whatever the reason, Patrick Sullivan now owns Dwarven Ruins by Mark Poole, one of his all-time favorite illustrations. On Friday, June 24, 2005, Wizards of the Coast highlighted Order of Lightbur for their ongoing Card of the Day series. This card got its name because the designers thought it would be funny to hear people describe denizens of Lightbur as Lightburites, which sounds an awful lot like Lightbrights. Perhaps they knew someday the company would be bought up by Hasbro? Sidestepping R&D, the community embraced a different pun more fitting of their age. "We'll have an order of light beer," they said, kicking off the night at the local dive. Order of Lightbearer and their mirror nemesis Order of the Ebon Hand are both 2/1 summon clerics for 2 white or 2 black mana respectively. They both have protection from their opposing colors, and they both have the same 2 activated abilities. Riffing on the motif established in Alpha, the so-called Pump Knights were fringe playable cards, with Ebon Hand showing up in Necropotence decks during the summer of '96. Randy Buehler registered 4 copies in his Necro build for Pro Tour Chicago, plus a playset of Knight of Stromgald, a functional reprint of the same card from Ice Age. Aside from a couple notable heavy hitters that have stood the test of time, Fallen Empires never really made a splash in constructed Magic. Nonetheless, the card file is brimming with rich concepts and prototypes, germs of ideas that would later flourish into more formalized designs. Magic was still finding its footing following its first release and experimenting with its mechanical potential. Present here are sketches, rough and unbound, like a garage band's first demos. Writing in the Duelist issue number 4, Richard Garfield remarked that the cards were complicated, but they looked great and they played well. He also claimed, "This expansion is easily my favorite." Take Dwarven Armorer, for example, a 1-mana 0/2 with an activated ability that lets you discard a card to put a +0/+1 counter or a +1/+0 counter on a creature. There is a clever ludonarrative experience happening here, with all parts justifying the whole. The dwarf is a cheap laborer who is tough, but not meant for battle. His job in the struggle is to turn scrap metal into either helmets and breastplates, or swords and axes. The discarded card represents the material requirements, and the counters, be them clunky for tracking purposes, are the armor or weapons fashioned in the process. You can see how the designers reasoned with themselves here. Giving a creature a new set of pauldrons shouldn't necessarily make their attacks any stronger, and similarly, lending them a mace wouldn't increase the damage they can withstand. Forwarding the choice to the player who must enact the role of the armorer lends a cool wrinkle to gameplay too. Are we building for the offensive or hunkering down on defense? Tying it all together is another quote from Sarpadian Empires Volume 4, hinting that the dwarves eventually made weapons and armor out of everything, even children's toys. Vidalian War Machine is another high-concept top-down design, with some fairly outdated rules text but very forward-thinking mechanics. For 3 mana, you get an 0/4 wall with 2 abilities. Tap a Merfolk to let it attack this turn, or tap a Merfolk to give it +2/+1 until end of turn. If the War Machine is destroyed, so too are the creatures operating it. Maybe some of this sounds familiar, as this card is Magic's first attempt at making a vehicle 22 years ahead of its time. Once again, you can anticipate the designer's imaginations at play. What if the Vidalians had mechanized defense systems against the Homerids? How could we communicate the idea of a bunch of creatures manning a perimeter wall? Creative questions like these drive so many designs in Fallen Empires. Ication Town, the game's first ever token-generating sorcery, envisions a group of citizens rallying together to defend their home. Thalids grow spores that burst into sapperlings, reflecting their ability to rapidly reproduce. Tidal Influence and the Homerids at large explore design space at the meta level of turns within a game. What if creatures changed and evolved based on abstract ideas, like weather patterns or phases of the moon? Zooming out to the macro level, Fallen Empires was a tribal-driven set in a time when creatures weren't Magic's focus. The color pie determines the monocolored factions and their enemy counterparts, which set the framework for future sets that worked within the same design space. I'd argue it's hard to make Ravnica in 2005 without Fallen Empires in '94. Although we've never formally returned to Sarpadia, I find it telling that R&D continues to pull from its source material. Both Thelon and Endric Sar, progenitors of the Thalids and Thralls respectively, made appearances in Time Spiral on their own legendary creature cards. Later reprinted in Modern Masters 2015, the accompanying Thrall token was illustrated by Mark Tadine, who referenced his horrifying original design of a tiny humanoid ball of spare arms holding a knife. It won't surprise you to learn that Endrik Saar was really into Phyrexian ideology. Sarpadian Empires Volume 7 was also printed in Time Spiral, which allows players to create one of 5 tokens that correspond to the 5 creature types responsible for conquering the continent. Doug Chaffee's somewhat disturbing illustration shows the tome's ability to bring the past back to life, quite literally. Flavortext writers have enjoyed returning to the volumes over the years, most recently on Goblin Oriflamme in Modern Horizons 1. It seems fragments of the histories are still surfacing as we move forward in time. Modern Horizons 2 realized more legends, with Turok and Sveljun making first-time appearances. The raw power of him set the stage for the namesake's debut, whose reputation precedes him. And Commander Legends in 2020 brought to life Tevish Zat, Doom of Fools, a deep-cut character from the Fallen Empires miniseries by Armada, a division of Acclaim Comics. Zats is the story of tragedy, revenge, and transformation from human to draconic monstrosity. Direct quotes in flavor text and glimmers of his ghastly form appeared on a few cards in Planeshift, but his Planeswalker card formalized his visual and mechanical identity. These comics, by the way, aren't beloved by the Vorthos crowd, but I find them cool as hell, especially the last few panels when Tev becomes Tevish and starts rampaging. The Armada comics marked a level-up moment for Magic's story. Antiquities and Fallen Empires set the stage for the Brothers' War, and the game's first multi-set epic. Direct investment from the company to produce comics and novels signaled their intent to expand the game beyond the cards and fill out their RPG-inspired settings with real stories. As a result of these many early sets, Dominaria would become something of a home base. Our first major return to the plane in 2018 brought with it a few new Thalids sporting a more standardized design. Where some may see an anthropomorphic fungal monster, I see a guy in a mushroom suit. Speaking of that, there was also exactly one Homerid printed in this set. Legend has it that this fella was inspired in part by a mysterious jigsaw puzzle sent in 4 segments to select employees at Wizards of the Coast. Once assembled, a single message emerged: empires fall, but tides rise again. Lorelei Weissel-Labrizzi, the puzzle maker and Homerid aficionado behind the scheme, told me that Homerid Explorer's existence was more or less a coincidence, that it stemmed from an ongoing inside joke between friends. In any case, it seems we finally learned where that warrior wandered off, walking stick and all. The flavor text hints at that deep-sea trench on Pete Venter's map from all those years before. When I think back to Fallen Empires, it's the Homerids who come to mind first. They are perfect representatives of Magic's first big failure. They're goofy and incongruent and have strange abilities and silly illustrations. Aside from a stray appearance every 5 years or so, they've also gone virtually extinct. Who knows if we'll ever see a full set's worth of support for the crab people of Sarpadia, or if their type line will instead be dissolved into a larger batch of creatures. But for a few players here and there, this misfit quality is what makes them so endearing and so special. And this one here is just a bit more special than the others. Across a few early issues of The Duelist, there was an ongoing column called Designer's Notes, which offered space to aspiring Garfields to discuss and promote new TCGs that weren't Magic. In issue number 3, writing about his upcoming project titled Wyvern, Mike Fitzgerald remarked, "I have been playing Magic since it was first released, and I am in love with the trading card game format. I have run sanctioned Magic tournaments and have been on the Duelist Convocation Top 25 list of players, so I come to game design as a player first." After pitching Wyvern's core gameplay loop, Fitzgerald concluded the brief write-up with an insight on the game's distribution. The outstanding artwork is presented in stunning full color on top quality cards being printed in Belgium by, who else? Cartamundi. In December 1995, quoted in The Duelist issue number 8, Doug Bissonette of US Games, the publisher of Wyvern, lent a grim prediction for the year to come. The market is so flooded, so flavor of the month, that small companies have trouble getting attention for their products. In The Duelist issue number 10, Published in May 1996, Wyvern's name would appear for the final time in a small blurb for its upcoming expansion, Chameleon. Across the next 5 issues, Alan Varney's column, Reports on Trading Card Games, would be characterized by speculation, warning, and hesitancy about the oversaturated market and its potential to crash. Eat or be eaten. This is the lesson of the gaming industry's previous fad, the D&D craze of the early 80s. So far, the trading card field has followed exactly the same meteoric track. Companies proliferate like fungi, then rapidly die off. Nevertheless, new blood continued to occupy ad space across the magazine, driven by hopeful pioneers sifting for hidden deposits of gold. While producing a small batch of premier starter decks, Cartamundi accidentally mixed up their printing sheets and created a hybrid series of misprints. Because they could only be found in Wyvern products, they were technically Wyvern cards with magic fronts, but the history refers to them instead as Wyvern backs, or rather, magic cards with the wrong reverse side. Cards from Fallen Empires are the only ones in existence bearing this printing error. Fallen Empires was supposed to kill magic. It failed at every metric and made every fatal mistake all at once. It is remembered with disdain and remains the punching bag alongside Homelands and Chronicles as the worst sets of all time. 27 of the 102 cards are on the reserved list, yet none is worth more than a few bucks in the marketplace. It was overprinted and underbaked, and its audience was ripe for the taking by the game's many competitors, the wannabes and the have-beens and the never-were, and yada yada yada. We're all still here, 31 years later, playing and discussing and loving not Wyvern, but Magic the fucking Gathering. My partnership continues this year with Foil Armor by Integra Products, the safest and most effective way to flatten your curled cards. Holographic trading cards warp due to differences in humidity between where they were manufactured and where they are now. A stack of heavy books won't fix that, but these two-way humidity control packs do. They've been specifically engineered to reset convex and concave cards. Keep your foils in tip-top shape so they look good on the battlefield and hold their value in your collection binder in the years to come. Go to flattenmycards.com and purchase some 8-gram foil armor packs for individual use and some bigger 33-gram packs for long-term storage. Use code STUDIES at checkout for 15% off. Thanks Foil Armor for the support. In preparation for this video, I did what I always do and purchased a handful of marquee cards to use as props for B-roll footage. This project, though, was a bit different because I found a guy on eBay selling every common with all their art variants for $39.50 after taxes and delivery. I then went to Card Kingdom and bought the remaining uncommons and rares for $57, meaning I spent $97 total and now own every single card from Fallen Empires. When the brick of commons arrived, I took like 20 minutes at my dining room table just admiring the quality of these old Magic cards. We're at the point now where these early sets have completely different aesthetic markers across the entirety of the card face, and panning through them feels something like going through an archive. It was such a cool experience. If you have a chance, pick up some older, unknown Magic cards, not for gameplay purposes, but just to admire the differences in how the early designers approached the game. So much of this video stemmed from that brief pause I took to pan through all the cards and really sit with them. I brought up Ication Scout by Phil Folio in this video. By total coincidence, Rob Bachman, my favorite Magic writer of all time, posted this card on Bluesky for Halloween, and it looked so familiar. I wonder if Gary Leach used Folio's bat design as inspiration for this piece. Pink wings, purple bat, probably a reach, but maybe a neat through line? I don't know. I bring this up because I think you should read all of Rob's work. His most recent piece is everything I love about his style and his mind. Find it at Hipsters of the Coast. It's called One Battle Damage After Another. Just brilliant. I'm offering a cool new reward for my highest tier patrons, a signed proxy of the Rhystic Storyteller. I commissioned Tim Gaedka to illustrate my playtest card from Gavin's Unknown event that he runs at all the Magic Cons. Folks have been building storyteller decks and sharing photos and deck lists in our Discord. I'd love to send you a card. Sign up on my Patreon to join in on the fun. It's been really sweet to see all the support and enthusiasm for this project. As always, thanks for watching.